Do you believe that you are naturally averse to exercise? Or have you been blessed with sporty genes? Do you think that stress is inherently debilitating? Or do you see that sometimes it can be enhancing and energizing? Do you associate age with wisdom and personal development? Or do you think that as you get older, it's simply a period of disability and decline? Now, our expectations are like the air that we breathe. They accompany us everywhere, but we're rarely aware of their presence around us. Often, your answers to these questions are much more subjective than you might have assumed. And what's really important is that those beliefs in themselves can actually shape important outcomes. This is the expectation effect. What you believe is true becomes true. Now, if you sound skeptical, so was I. Before I started looking into this scientific literature, I was quite the cynic and pessimist. I just didn't believe that our mindsets really mattered that much for anything important in life. But as a science writer, I kept on coming across paper after paper showing that we create these self-fulfilling prophecies through changes to our perception, our behaviour, and our physiology. Our mindsets can change everything from the impact of the physical exercise that you do to your risk of burnout and even how long you live. Like you heard that right, it can really change our longevity. Now, this new understanding comes from a theory of the brain that sees the brain as a prediction machine. And put simply, that means that the brain is constantly simulating the world around us. It's constantly building these models that it then uses to shape the way we process sensory data and then to determine the response to the situation that we find ourselves in. And it does that by drawing on all of the memories of the experiences that we've had in the past and then the context that we find ourselves in. Now, often we don't really notice this, but it does become very visible when we look at certain ambiguous situations. And just a very simple example of this comes from the following image. Now, this is a very famous kind of visual illusion, and you probably either see this as a duck or a rabbit. Now, what animal you see is going to depend on which animal you have at the top of your mind. Questioning participants outside Zurich Zoo, Swiss researchers found that on Easter Sunday, people were much more likely to see the rabbit than they were to see the duck. And amazingly, that was especially true for the young children that they questioned. Because, as you can imagine, for a young child, the Easter Bunny has some kind of special importance. Now, that may seem like a flippant example, but actually this is happening all the time. And I think it really helps us to understand things like paranormal experiences. So if on Halloween you're walking through the woods and you hear a high-pitched sound and you already believe in the paranormal, you're much more likely to interpret that as some kind of ghostly shriek rather than what it really is, a tree creaking. Similarly, in a sports match, if it's tennis, for example, one player might see the ball falling inside the court, the other player might see the ball falling outside the court. And that is really a result of the players' simulations, the prediction machine in action. They're not lying, they've just built different simulations that then process the sensory data to lead them to different perceptions. Now, the impact of the prediction machine and the expectation effect becomes even more profound when we look at the ways it can affect our health and well-being. And that's because besides changing the sensory data, the prediction machine is also preempting the challenges that we're going to face and then changing our physiology accordingly. It can do things like change our blood pressure, change our hormonal balance, and change the chemicals within our brain. Now, we see this with the most famous expectation effect, which is the placebo effect. Now, when we are suffering from pain, pain is the best example of this effect. The brain has, again, two different ways of interpreting the signals coming from the body. If it still feels that it's in danger, and it's worried that, that it's going to suffer from further injury, then the brain can amplify those signals because it knows that they're a warning. But if the brain decides that actually you're quite safe and you're receiving the treatment that you need, then it can afford to downplay those signals. And what's amazing is it actually does that by changing the chemicals in your brain. It releases endogenous opioids and cannabinoids, which are real painkillers. It's tapping its own inner pharmacy. And we know that even when you take a real drug, not a sham drug, like morphine, for example, about 50% of the pain relief comes from the expectation of relief, rather than from the actual chemical effect of the drug. You don't see such a big effect of the drug if, for example, it's delivered surreptitiously through an intravenous drip. It's only when the patient knows that they're receiving the treatment that they have the full benefit. Now, what really blew my mind as I started looking into the expectation effect was the fact that actually we see similar kinds of expectation effects and using the mind-body connection in all areas of health and well-being. All of those lifestyle changes that we're making are actually subject to expectation effects. And this is especially true for things like exercise. Now, if you're exercising, you're getting these sensations from the body. You might be out of breath, your muscles might be aching, and it feels very uncomfortable. You're getting hot. It's not necessarily a pleasant, calming experience. But again, there are two ways of interpreting that, much like the duck-rabbit illusion. If you're really confident in your fitness and you believe that you have those good sporty genes, what happens is you can interpret those sensations as a sign of progress, that you're actually just building your strength and stamina. If, on the other hand, you've always been a bit of a couch potato, you were bad at gym, at school, and then you're just going to the gym and you feel out of breath and sweaty, 5 minutes into your run, then you're going to see those sensations as a sign of failure. It's proof to you that you're not cut out for exercise. Otherwise, why aren't you enjoying it more? Now, those expectations can change the experience and then the physical performance through this mind-body connection, much like the placebo effect. We know this from an amazing study at Stanford University. Now, the researchers there invited the participants into the lab for a genetic test, and they were looking at one particular gene, the CREB1 gene, which has been known to be associated with endurance exercise. If you have that gene, you can tend to have more stamina, but importantly, you also then find the exertion less physically exhausting. Whereas people with the bad version of the gene tend to find it a little bit more difficult, and they don't have such stamina. Now, the participants had the real genetic test, but they were given sham results. Some people with the good gene were told they had the bad version of the gene and vice versa. And those expectations independently shaped their performance. Simply believing you had the good gene increased people's stamina and endurance and reduced the perceived exertion. Now, even more importantly, when it came to some physiological measures, those expectations actually mattered more than the genes themselves. And this was the case, for example, with the gas exchange within the lungs, the transfer of carbon dioxide and oxygen, which is so important for good physical fitness. In that case, just believing that you were good at sport actually proved to be more important. So I think if you're, just going to the gym for the first time, we can just learn a very simple lesson from this, and that's to just change the way we're approaching the exercise and thinking about those sensations. We should try to adopt that mindset that they're actually signs that we are building our strength and that we're helping the body. Even if it's only into your 5-minute run, 5 minutes into your run, like you're still pushing your body and you'll see an improvement over time. And the research has shown that that really can make the experience a lot more pleasurable and improve your trajectory over time. And we can see a similar mindset effect when we look at the effects of stress. Something like public speaking. When I was waiting outside, I won't lie, my heart was racing. You could probably see my heart beating even through my t-shirt. And in the past, I would have seen that as being a kind of sign of imminent failure. I would have assumed that to perform well and to remember, all that I want to communicate to you, I would have to feel relaxed. And if I felt anxious, something was wrong, and that was going to make me fail. But actually, there's another way of looking at stress. You can see stress as being enhancing and energizing. And we know that this is true because why else would the stress response have evolved in the first place? It has to be adaptive in almost all situations. And so researchers have tried to communicate to their participants this simple fact. So when my heart was racing, was that a sign of failure, or was it actually just my brain and body preparing me for giving this talk? That actually, because the talk is important to me, it was helping to pump lots of oxygenated blood to my brain so that I could think more clearly and so that I'd be more alert and attentive to the audience. Now, the researchers found that when they do educate people like that, it improves performance in all kinds of things, not just public speaking, but difficult graduate exams or, important sports events. And importantly, it also changes some of the physiological characteristics of the stress. The kind of changes to the cardiovascular system, for example, become a bit healthier. It doesn't lead to such a big rise in blood pressure. And you also recover much more quickly. That's crucial because if you're in a high pressure job or any kind of high pressure situation that you're facing day after day, week after week, it's really important that once you escape from the immediate situation, that you have downtime to recover. And it seems that having this positive stress mindset helps you to do this, so your body can go back to all those other important activities like digestion. That's going to stop you suffering from the long-term effects of chronic stress. So it protects you from things like burnout or even cardiovascular disease that sometimes comes from chronic stress over the long term. Now, my final expectation effect that I want to discuss is also the one that completely blew my mind, and this concerns aging. Now, when most people are asked about aging, they often only talk about the negative sides, the increased risk of illness, the cognitive decline, forgetfulness. But actually, some people do recognize that there are some benefits that come with aging too. And this has been confirmed by science that things like the wisdom of your decision-making and your general knowledge and your expressive vocabulary actually peak well into old age, well past the normal retirement age for people. And the research shows that the people who have that mindset, who can see the positives, actually have much better health into old age. So they're much less likely to develop Alzheimer's disease, for example. And that's evident even in the amount of the amyloid plaques that you find in the brain that are thought to be behind the disease. Even more impressively, the people with the positive aging mindset also live for longer, about 7.5 years longer, in fact. That's a huge difference in lifespan. And I have to say, I found that absolutely incredible when I read it. But then I looked into all of the scientific research, and the mechanisms are very well documented. And one is behaviour, which we shouldn't discount. The fact is, if you see aging as being this positive process, you're more likely to stay active, and then that helps keep the body it helps it to maintain its health. But equally importantly, there's another physiological expectation effect. And that's because if you associate aging with vulnerability, all of the challenges that you have to face in life, posting the letter, doing your grocery shopping, meeting new people, they become more dangerous and threatening. And we know that this can then lead to chronically high levels of certain hormones like cortisol without any respite. And also that then that can lead to things like inflammation within the body, which is known over the long term, over months and years, to lead to wear and tear on our tissues. And we can even see these changes right down to the gene expression within our cells. Put simply, when we get older, like you see changes in the way that genes act within the cells. And by measuring those changes, biologists can kind of look at this epigenetic clock, they call it. And for the people with the positive aging mindset, that clock ticks more slowly. So they're just less likely to accumulate all of the damage that can happen as people normally age. And that can then lead to a lower risk of illness, like Alzheimer's disease, and also a lower risk of death. Now, if you want to develop that mindset, I'd advise that you look for some positive role models. While I was researching the expectation effect, I was lucky to interview Paddy Jones, who's the oldest acrobatic salsa dancer in the world. She started dancing professionally in her 60s and still performs globally all over the world to this day. She realized that you don't have to just accept the beliefs and expectations that others are imposing on you. You can challenge them. And you can do the same. No, maybe it's not aging, maybe it's your fitness, maybe it's your responses to stress. But what one belief is holding you back? And do you truly dare to challenge that belief? According to the amazing and now very prolific research on the expectation effect, you may be astonished by the results that you achieve. So that's my challenge. Thank you for listening to me.